Often in large families, the older children are the big kids and the younger the little kids. That's how it always was with our siblings. Twist, Tom, and I were the big kids, while Audrey, Chuck, and Pat were the little kids. I was 7 when I got my first little sister, Audrey, and it made me so happy. I can remember being so excited about the birth of each baby. It was always a great surprise, as we were never told in advance. Our mom would just come home with the new baby, and we'd all be happy. When we were growing up, spanking was the preferred method of child discipline, at least among the families that we knew. The first year of his life, our little brother Chuck was plagued with bronchitis, and I recall one night our mother, in a state of great distress, taking him to the hospital, which was nearly an hour away. I was just old enough to understand that she was afraid our baby brother might not come back home with her. It was not his last hospital visit, but eventually he outgrew the disease, and his life has been such a treasured gift to our family. Chuck had a peculiar self-soothing habit from infancy that resulted in the forming of a hard ridge on his front hairline. It was there to protect his brain from concussion. When he was tired, he would get on his hands and knees and bang his head against the crib in order to rock himself to sleep. From our upstairs bedrooms, we could hear the banging, gentle at first, growing more intense with each hit. It was impossible for anyone in the house to get sleep while Chuck was banging his head. The crib was in our parents' bedroom downstairs, and our father, who was an early riser, needed his sleep. Night after night, we could hear our dad ordering the infant to stop. He would be quiet for a few minutes, and then the cycle would repeat. Most nights, after 1 or 2 cycles, baby Chuck would fall asleep and all would be well. But one night, the cycle was endless, and our father finally lost his patience and spanked his infant son. I lay aching in my bed, feeling that this was a bridge too far and that my poor baby brother had no way of understanding why this happened to him. Though our mother might have handed out more spankings than our father, I can't help but wonder what she was feeling. Considering that causing pain to little children was an acceptable form of discipline in those days, I don't think we suffered more physical abuse than any other kids. We lived in a wilderness where once a bear left his calling card under the apple tree in our front yard. So from a safety standpoint, it was critical that we minded our parents. Tom was pretty feisty, and he always made sure that he got more than his fair share of spankings. In addition to our log cabin, the outbuildings in our yard included a tool shed, an outhouse, an unlivable cabin, and a woodshed that attached to a 4x4 space with exterior access. We called it the ice house. The ice house was filled to waist height with wood chips that would keep a buried chunk of ice from thawing in summer. One day, when Tom was probably around 3 years old, he did something that earned him a pretty brutal spanking from our dad, who was rarely calm when issuing this discipline. After the spanking, our dad, armed with his cuss words that always made the tools work better, crawled back under the truck he'd been fixing. He'd been working for a while, laying on the dirt in his back, when he noticed a little pair of legs planted on the opposite side from where he was working. He knew it was Tom, so he just kept working, thinking this boy would just walk off, but that's not what happened. The little legs never moved, and after a while, our dad began to regret the severity of the punishment he'd issued. There was his little boy waiting so patiently with such loyalty for his daddy to come out from under the truck. It melted his heart, and he eventually scooted himself to where he could poke his head out from under the truck and make up with the little guy. He was probably chuckling to himself when the big stick that Tom had been wielding the whole time came crashing down on his head. Unfortunately for Tom, he had failed to consider that he could outrun his father, so I'm pretty sure he got another spanking. We all went back to what we were doing, but as time passed, our mother realized that she hadn't seen Tom in a while, and when she couldn't track him down, she panicked and instigated an all-out search of everything. The creek, the barnyard buildings and corrals, the sheds around the house, the chicken coop, the outhouse, and the fields. He was nowhere to be found. Each minute that passed must have been torture for our parents, who were running out of places to look, with no one in the vicinity to help them. They had even checked the lake, which was a half-mile away and not visible from the house. Finally, and to the relief of all, Tom just appeared out of nowhere. We had checked the small space in the ice house several times with no luck, but we had failed to account for what a clever, patient little guy Tom was. He was little enough to have buried himself in the sawdust in the ice house. He'd been there the whole time, managing to stay still every time someone poked their head in. He may have earned himself a third spanking that day, even though the effectiveness of spankings should have been called into question. If the desired outcome was good behavior, it clearly was not working very well that day. Twist and I always took spankings more seriously than our little brother Tom. Winters in BC were intense. Some years the snow was as deep as our parents were tall, and the roads were always a blanket of ice. The Lesowski family had a pond that would freeze over with ice so thick they'd build a bonfire on it and invite us all to go skating. It was so exciting. We would wear 2 pairs of wool socks, causing our toes to feel pinched as we skated joyfully with our friends and their families beneath the black star-studded sky with the glow of the bonfire that could warm us should we get too cold. Perhaps if we had spent more time at the fire, it would not have been so painful when it came time to remove the skates and put on our boots. Though we would be crying from the pain, it was never a deterrent. At home, we would constantly play too long in the snow, causing our feet to be so cold that removing our boots was unbearable, only to go out and do it again the next day. Our mother seemed to enjoy the Christmas season. She made a big deal of us helping her decorate the tree, and she would take us to the Ben Franklin store in Vernon, where we would wait in line with a lot of other kids to sit on Santa's lap. Our mother was giddy one year when, of all the children photographed with Santa, Tom was the one chosen to appear in the front page of the newspaper. It was complete validation for how cute he was, and she obtained multiple copies of the paper to share. Tom's reign of cuteness would come to an abrupt end when little Pat was born. Everyone said he was the most beautiful baby they had ever seen. To this day, I don't know if Tom ever knew he had lost his title. Our father liked to have Twist and Tom with him as he went about his daily duties. He had probably assumed that one day they would both have their own ranch, and they needed to learn about farming and ranching. It wasn't unusual for them to be standing behind him on the back of the tractor as he plowed and harrowed the ground for planting. They would stand on each side of the power takeoff device that would drive the machinery that was pulled by the tractor. This was something they always enjoyed. The school bus stop was 5 miles from our house, and our mother would drive us and the Hoffman girls to and from the bus stop. One spring day when I was probably in 2nd grade, my mother was not at the bus stop, which was located at the lane that led to the Lesowski house. It might have been one of the Lesowskis or Hoffmans that took me to wait for my mother, as there had been an accident and she was at the hospital with Twist. It turns out that the boys had been on the tractor with no equipment attached to the power takeoff, leaving it exposed. It had caught Twist's pant leg, snapping his little leg bones. What a relief when I finally saw Twist in his cast, resilient as ever. He never expressed the pain, seeming to take it all in stride and maybe even being a little bit proud of the cast, wearing it like a badge of honor. I think we all were pretty tough little kids. For the most part, I remember the little kids in Canada only as babies. There is a memory of my little sister Audrey wearing a summer dress and sitting on the ground with her little body covered in no-see-ums. She had bites everywhere, but didn't cry. For some reason, the tiny bugs only affected her. I also recall an incident at the pond near the Lesowski house. She was wearing a white fleece hooded shirt, minding her own business, when out of nowhere, a goose viciously attacked her. It was surmised that the attack occurred because little Audrey looked too much like a weird goose. Following the incident, our mother made sure that we never wore white when visiting the Lesowskis. I recall the Lesowski house as clearly as I recall our own. Mrs. Lesowski was always making dolls and braided rugs, and the house had a room where they kept canaries in cages. I remember her showing us how the spinning wheel worked. She also had a loom. It is quite possible that the Lasowski house is where my siblings and I would go when our mother was in the hospital getting us a new baby. I slept there more than once, waking up to a breakfast of fried trout, which was not a favorite. It was the grandest home in Cherryville, full of comfortable furnishings and feather beds, but I don't think they went to town very much. It seemed that everything they had was made from the bounty of the land, with the exception of toilet paper. It was clear that we were to use no more than 6 squares. I'm not sure how old we were when our dad came home with the gasoline-powered washing machine for our mother. She was probably overjoyed, but I don't think she ever got used to the primitive conditions. It was around that time that he obtained a gas generator and strung green electrical wire across the ceilings of the first floor so we could have light at night. Till then, it had been kerosene lanterns with mantles that would have to be continuously replaced. We would have to pump the lamps before we could light them. Sometimes we would run out of mantles and have to use candles or just sit in the dark. Our mother was an avid stargazer. She would call us outside sometimes at night to point out the constellations, stars, and planets, and sometimes the aurora borealis. She was familiar with UFOs a long time before it became a thing. The world beyond our world held such fascination for her, and she wanted us to see it. Survival on the ranch came with some harsh realities. Most of our food came from the garden or the livestock. There was a pantry full of the items our mother would can every year in the basement next to the wood furnace. I am fairly certain our dad got no pleasure out of what needed to be done in order for us to have meat. He would sometimes hunt with friends, but I'm pretty sure that he enjoyed the social aspects much more than he enjoyed the hunt. Twist and Tom, from the time they were toddlers, were often with him when it came time to butcher, and they were fully aware of what a knife could do. As adults, we siblings could count on one hand the times we ever witnessed our dad drunk, and we thought it was pretty funny. But when we were little, he was prone to drinking too much with friends. Twist and Tom were with him one day as he had an errand to run in town. On his way home from Lumbee, he was passing the tavern when he noticed a couple of his buddies' cars and thought it would be okay to leave the boys in the truck while he stopped for a quick beer with them. One beer turned into 2, and at some point he completely forgot about his 2 little sons in the truck. By the time he decided to go home, he was slurring his cuss words and stumbling a little bit. He found his little son scared and crying in the truck as Tom had pooped his pants. In our family, the pooping of pants was the sort of thing that always ended up with a spanking, and poor little Tom had tried his hardest to hold it, hoping his daddy would come out and take him to the bathroom, but eventually he just had to let it go. Our dad wasn't so drunk that he didn't realize whose fault this was, but it stunk so bad he didn't want to ride home with it, and so he decided to take the boys into the tavern's bathroom to solve the problem. The patrons in the bar watched him herd 2 little boys into the bathroom, shaking his head and muttering every foul word he knew. Our dad had never once changed a diaper or even watched our mother do it. He had 0 experience at this. Once inside the bathroom, he made Tom lay on the floor while he figured out what he could do that wouldn't make a mess, swearing the whole time. His demeanor only amplified the anxiety the boys were already experiencing. He figured out what he needed to do. If he just cut Tom's pants off, he wouldn't have to slide that mess down his legs. He pulled out his knife, at which point a terrified Twist began to scream at the top of his lungs, "No, Daddy, please don't kill him, please don't kill him." It looked really bad when several of the tavern patrons burst through the door to find our dad bending over one son with the knife in his hand as the other screamed, "No, Daddy, please don't kill him." He was able to explain the situation, and nobody thought twice about the appropriateness of allowing 2 little children to crawl back in the truck with the drunk guy who was going to drive a wilderness road to get them home. That may have been the day our dad decided to quit drinking.